48 hours. That's all we have left. 48 hours until the United States and Iran are supposed to sit down for nuclear talks that could determine whether we're heading toward peace or the largest military conflict in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And those talks, they're already falling apart. Iran changed the location twice. First from Istanbul to Oman. Then they started demanding changes to the format, the scope, and who gets to participate. Trump threatened to walk away. Arab leaders begged him not to. And now, with U.S. aircraft carriers surrounding Iran and Revolutionary Guard gunboats harassing American ships, we are literally on the edge of war. Let's get into the details in today's video. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here. Please make sure that you are subscribed to Solando Opinion on YouTube and follow us on social media for more exclusive content. I would absolutely love to see you there. Links are in the video description below to get connected. Let me set the scene for you. It's Wednesday, February 4th, 2026. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, are supposed to meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in less than 48 hours. The talks are scheduled for Friday, February 6th, but as of right now, nobody knows if they're actually going to happen, because Iran keeps changing the terms, and Trump's patience is running out. Here's what happened. Originally, the talks were supposed to take place in Istanbul, Turkey. That made sense. Turkey has been a mediator between the U.S. and Iran for years. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was going to facilitate. And this wasn't going to be just a bilateral meeting. Foreign ministers from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey were all expected to attend. This was going to be a major regional summit. Everyone with a stake in preventing a Middle East war was coming to the table. But then, on Tuesday, Iran sent a message. They wanted to move the location from Turkey to Oman. And they wanted to change the format from multilateral to bilateral. Just Iran and the United States, nobody else. At first, the Trump administration said yes, they agreed to move to Oman. A senior U.S. official confirmed to multiple news outlets that they would accommodate Iran's request. Why? Because Trump has been saying for weeks that he wants to avoid military conflict. He's been publicly calling for a deal. So when Iran asked to change the venue, the White House said, fine, we'll do it. But then Iran didn't stop there. According to sources who spoke to Axios and Reuters, Iran also demanded that the talks focus only on nuclear issues, not missiles, not proxy groups, not human rights violations during the recent crackdown on protesters, just nuclear. And Iran said they didn't want all those regional countries in the room. They wanted it to be just Washington and Tehran. And that's when the Trump administration said no. On Wednesday morning, a senior U.S. official told Axios, and I quote, "We told them it is this or nothing, and they said, okay, then nothing." The talks were off. Trump was ready to walk away, and that triggered absolute panic across the Middle East, because everyone knew what comes next. Military strikes. But then something extraordinary happened. At least 9 Arab countries reached out to the White House at the highest levels. Leaders from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Egypt, and others personally called Trump's team and begged them not to cancel the meeting. They said, please, just sit down with Iran, listen to what they have to say, give diplomacy one more chance. According to a U.S. official who spoke to Axios, these countries were desperate. They know that if the U.S. strikes Iran, the entire region goes up in flames. Oil prices will spike. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz could be blocked. Iran's proxy militias will activate across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and thousands of people will die. So the Trump administration agreed. They said, fine, we'll do the meeting in Oman, but we're doing it to be respectful to our Arab allies, not because we think it's going to work. A second U.S. official said they're very skeptical that Iran will agree to Trump's demands, but they're going to show up on Friday anyway. And as of Wednesday evening, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed on social media that talks are scheduled for Friday morning in Muscat, Oman. He thanked the Omani government for making arrangements. So it looks like the talks are back on for now. But here's the problem. The fundamental issues haven't been resolved. Trump wants to discuss 3 things: Iran's nuclear program, Iran's ballistic missile program, and Iran's support for terrorist groups and militias across the region. Iran has said their missiles and their regional allies are non-negotiable. According to an Iranian diplomatic source who spoke to Reuters, Tehran is willing to show flexibility on uranium enrichment. But missiles and proxies are off the table, so you can see the disconnect. The U.S. wants to talk about 3 topics. Iran only wants to talk about 1. That's not a negotiation. That's a fundamental disagreement about what they're even negotiating about. And there's another complication. Iran wants the United States to withdraw its military forces from the Middle East before talks even begin. An Iranian official told Reuters on Sunday that Iran wants the U.S. to remove aircraft carriers, bombers, and troops from the region as a precondition. That's a complete non-starter for Washington. Trump has positioned more military assets around Iran in the past 2 weeks than at any time since the Iraq War. He's not pulling them out, he's using them as leverage. Now let's talk about what Trump has deployed, because this is serious. The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike group is in the Arabian Sea. That's a nuclear-powered carrier with dozens of fighter jets. The USS Iwo Jima amphibious assault ship is nearby. Multiple guided missile destroyers are positioned in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. B-52 strategic bombers have been deployed to bases in the region. And according to satellite images obtained by Fox News, U.S. military aircraft, including Ospreys, are now stationed at Duqm Airport in Oman. That's the same country where the talks are supposed to happen on Friday. Trump himself said last week that the force he's assembled is even bigger than what he used in Venezuela. And in Venezuela, the U.S. used 150 fighter jets from 20 different air bases to conduct a 30-minute operation that captured President Nicolas Maduro. So when Trump says he has a bigger force positioned against Iran, he's not exaggerating. This is a massive military buildup. And it's sending a very clear message to Tehran: make a deal or we strike. But Iran is sending its own messages, and they're not backing down. On Tuesday, 2 separate incidents happened in the span of 6 hours that U.S. officials described as very aggressive. First, Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast gunboats tried to board a U.S.-flagged commercial ship near the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian boats scattered when a U.S. Navy destroyer approached. Then, a few hours later, an Iranian drone flew directly toward the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. The drone failed to respond to multiple warnings, so a U.S. F-A-18 fighter jet shot it down. That's the second time this week that U.S. forces have shot down an Iranian drone in international waters. Was this Iran testing U.S. defenses? Was it hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard trying to sabotage the talks? Or was it a deliberate provocation to show that Iran isn't afraid? We don't know, but it shows just how close we are to an accidental escalation. One miscalculation, one overly aggressive move, and this could spiral into open conflict before the talks even start. And there's more. Iran's top military commander, Ali Shamkhani, who is a senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, told Lebanese television on Monday that Iran is prepared for a possible war. He said Iran has its military forces ready with their fingers on the trigger. He also warned that if the U.S. attacks Iran, we will certainly strike Israel. So Iran is making very clear that any U.S. military action won't be contained to Iran. It will spread across the entire region. Israel will be hit. U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE will be targeted. And Iran's proxy militias will activate everywhere. Let's talk about what's actually at stake here. First, Iran's nuclear program. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran currently has more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. That's enough material to build 6 to 8 nuclear weapons if they decided to weaponize it. Right now, Iran insists their program is purely civilian, but they've been enriching uranium to 60% purity. That's just below the 90% threshold considered weapons grade. And Iran has been rebuilding its nuclear facilities even deeper underground since the U.S. and Israel bombed 3 of their sites last June. Second, Iran's missile program. Iran has one of the largest ballistic missile arsenals in the Middle East. Thousands of missiles with ranges that can reach Israel, Saudi Arabia, and U.S. bases throughout the region. During last year's 12-day war with Israel, Iran fired hundreds of missiles at Israeli cities. Many were intercepted by the Iron Dome, but some got through. And Iran has been rebuilding its stockpiles ever since. Trump wants limits on Iran's missiles. Iran says no. They view their missiles as their only real defense against superior U.S. and Israeli air power. Third, Iran's regional proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi militias, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. All of these groups receive weapons, funding, and training from Iran. They're Iran's way of projecting power across the region without directly confronting the U.S. or Israel. Trump wants Iran to cut off support to these groups. Iran says that's non-negotiable. These militias are strategic assets. They give Iran influence and leverage. Giving them up would leave Iran isolated and vulnerable. And fourth, there's the economic situation. Iran is desperate for sanctions relief. The U.S. sanctions imposed by Trump during his first term and kept in place by Biden have crippled Iran's economy. Inflation is out of control. The currency has collapsed. And just last month, Iran experienced the largest protests in years. Thousands of people were killed when security forces opened fire on demonstrators. The protests were triggered by economic hardship, water shortages, and decades of government corruption. So Iran needs a deal. They need sanctions lifted so money can flow into the economy. But here's where it gets complicated. Iran is not speaking with one voice. President Masoud Pezeshkian, who is relatively moderate, has publicly instructed his foreign minister to pursue negotiations. On Tuesday, Pezeshkian posted on social media saying he wants fair and equitable negotiations in an environment free from threats and unreasonable expectations. That sounds like someone who genuinely wants to make a deal. But Pezeshkian doesn't have final authority. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei does. And Khamenei has been warning that any U.S. attack will trigger a regional war. And then there are the Revolutionary Guards. They're even more hardline than Khamenei. The IRGC controls Iran's missile program, its proxy militias, and significant portions of Iran's economy. They have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. They profit from the sanctions environment through smuggling and black market operations, and they see themselves as the defenders of the Islamic Revolution. Compromising with America, which they call the Great Satan, would be seen as surrender. So even if Pezeshkian wants to make concessions, and even if Khamenei gives his approval, the Revolutionary Guards could undermine the deal. Now let's talk about Trump's position. What does he actually want? Trump has said repeatedly that he doesn't want another Middle East war. During his campaign, he criticized the Iraq War and said America should stop being the world's police. But he's also said that Iran cannot be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. And he's made clear that if Iran doesn't make a deal, he will use military force. So which Trump are we going to get? The deal maker who wants to avoid war, or the strongman who will order strikes to prevent Iran from getting the bomb? According to analysts who spoke to the Atlantic Council, Trump's military options aren't great. He could strike Iran's nuclear facilities again, but many of them are now buried deep underground, making them harder to destroy. He could target Iranian leadership, including Khamenei and IRGC commanders, but that risks turning Iran into a failed state with no clear successor government. He could launch a massive air campaign to cripple Iran's military, but that would require sustained bombing over weeks or months. And Trump doesn't want another long, expensive war. So Trump is betting that the threat of military action will force Iran to make concessions. He's positioned the most powerful military force in the world on Iran's doorstep. He's made clear he's willing to use it. And now he's saying, make a deal or face the consequences. But Iran is calling his bluff. They're saying, we've survived U.S. pressure before. We survived the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s when 1 million people died. We survived decades of sanctions. We can survive Trump. Here's what happens on Friday. If the talks take place, Witkoff and Kushner will sit down with IRGC in Muscat, Oman. It's unclear if any of the regional foreign ministers will be there. That's still being negotiated. The U.S. will present its demands: full nuclear transparency, limits on enrichment, restrictions on missiles, an end to support for militias, and sanctions relief in exchange. Iran will likely offer to cap enrichment at current levels, maybe allow some inspections, and ask for immediate sanctions removal. But they won't give up missiles, and they won't abandon their regional allies. So the talks will likely end without a breakthrough. Both sides will say they made progress. They'll agree to keep talking, and the world will breathe a temporary sigh of relief. But nothing fundamental will change. And a few weeks from now, we'll be right back where we are today, on the edge of war, unless something unexpected happens. Maybe Iran makes major concessions because they're so desperate for economic relief. Maybe Trump accepts a limited deal that doesn't address missiles or proxies because he doesn't want a war before the midterm elections. Or maybe the talks collapse completely and Trump orders strikes, and we wake up next week to news that U.S. bombers have hit targets across Iran. The scary part is that nobody knows. Not the Pentagon, not the State Department, not even Trump himself probably knows what he'll do if Iran says no. This is being decided in real time by people under enormous pressure, with the stakes as high as they can possibly be. And all of it could change in the next 48 hours. One more thing. Let's talk about what this means for the rest of the world. If the U.S. strikes Iran, oil prices will immediately spike. The Strait of Hormuz carries about 20% of the world's oil. If Iran mines it or sinks ships to block it, oil could hit $150 per barrel or higher. That means $7 to $8 per gallon gasoline in the United States. It means inflation spikes globally. It means economic recession. And it's not just oil. Iran's proxy militias will activate. Hezbollah will fire rockets at Israel. The Houthis will attack Saudi Arabia and UAE. Iraqi militias will target U.S. forces. Syria becomes a battlefield. We're talking about a regional war that could drag in dozens of countries and last for years. And there's the nuclear question. If Iran is losing badly and the regime is about to fall, would they race to build a nuclear weapon as a last resort? Would Israel launch preemptive strikes to prevent that? These are the nightmare scenarios that military planners are gaming out right now. So where does that leave us? 48 hours from now, we'll know if diplomacy has a chance, or if we're heading toward the largest U.S. military operation in the Middle East since 2003. The talks are scheduled for Friday morning in Oman. Trump has positioned overwhelming military force around Iran. Arab leaders are pleading for restraint. Iran is demanding concessions the U.S. won't give. And both sides are preparing for the possibility that talks will fail. This is not normal diplomacy. This is brinkmanship at its most dangerous. Two countries with fundamentally incompatible demands, enormous military capabilities, and deep mutual distrust, trying to avoid a war that neither side really wants, but both sides are prepared to fight. And the window for preventing it is closing fast. Stay tuned. I will keep you updated as this story develops. The talks are supposed to happen Friday morning. That's less than 48 hours from now. And what happens in that room in Muscat could determine whether we have peace or war in the Middle East for the next decade. This is a story about power, about miscalculation, and about whether leaders can step back from the edge when the entire world is watching. And it's far from over. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was informative. Please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who might find it interesting. I appreciate every single one of you who watches and engages with this content. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.